Hey y'all, we are continuing with our reading of Halloween Vibes, the Eternal Rest Bed and Breakfast Paranormal Cozy Mysteries novella that is set around Halloween time. So we are continuing today with chapter 4, so let's go. Chapter 4, Murderous Vibes, Slashed up pumpkins in the cemetery, and a missing carving knife from my own kitchen. Emily's eyes turned upward. Rebecca and Wyatt's room was the one above the parlor, with windows looking out over the front lawn and the cemetery. Had one of her guests killed Joe Carruthers? Rebecca and Wyatt had both been so upset after running into Rebecca's ex-boyfriend the night before. "You still there, Emily?" Trish asked. Emily blinked. "Yeah, I'm still here, Trish. One of my guests has a connection to the murder victim. She used to date him as a teenager, and they ran into each other last night. Sounds like it wasn't a very happy reunion." "Yeah, I know. That's why I wanted to call you as soon as possible." Emily held the phone slightly away from herself and gave it a puzzled look. When she brought it back up to her ear, she asked, "Did you say you already knew?" "Of course," Trish said casually. "Okay, I didn't know for sure the ex-girlfriend was staying with you, but I did hear that a girl Joe used to date was in town, and they ran into each other last night." Despite the gravity of the situation, Emily couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her lips. Trish was the reigning gossip queen in Oak Hill. "Since you know that detail, then do you also know who murdered Joe?" "That I do not know, or I would be talking to Detective Hernandez right now. He and a whole team of police officers are across the street from my shop at the crime scene." Trish had opened Grainy Day Bakery on the picturesque square in downtown Oak Hill because it was a great location for business, but it also happened to be a great spot for collecting local news. If Joe had been murdered in the square, that meant Trish had something close to a front row seat for the crime scene investigation. "Thanks for the news, Trish," Emily said. "I'll let my guests know once they're up for the day." "Oof, good luck with that." Once she was off the phone, Emily flopped back in her desk chair, her eyes staring up at the ceiling. So far, she hadn't heard a single creak of a floorboard, which meant Rebecca and Wyatt were still in bed. She wouldn't have to give them the news about Joe just yet. Or maybe they already know because one of them did it. Emily sat up straight as a sudden thought struck her. "Wait a minute," she said out loud. "I can figure that out right now." Emily had installed a security camera at the front door of Eternal Rest. She had done it to help protect her home from anyone who might want to get in, but so far it had been more valuable for discovering who was going out at odd hours. Before long, Emily had pulled up the previous night's video footage on her laptop. Emily had retreated to her bedroom shortly after 9 o'clock, so she began her search there. She fast-forwarded through the footage until she reached 9:45. Rebecca suddenly appeared on the screen, stepping carefully across the front porch and down the stairs. Emily gasped. Rebecca must have been incredibly stealthy because Emily had been hearing virtually every little creak and squeak the house made since her husband Scott had died. Living alone in a big old house seemed to have enhanced her hearing. Somehow, though, Rebecca had eluded her notice. "I was in the shower when she left," Emily realized. Emily fast-forwarded some more, looking for Rebecca's return. Instead, about 20 minutes after Rebecca had left, Wyatt had followed. Like his wife, he had clearly made an effort to be silent. There was nothing else to see on the security camera footage until shortly before midnight, when a black form glided up the stairs and onto the porch. This time around, Sage's costume didn't make Emily jump. She saw herself leaving with Sage, then the two of them returning nearly an hour later. Still, there was no sign of Rebecca or Wyatt. Emily had been back in bed for 45 minutes before the two of them had returned together. "No wonder those two are still asleep," Emily muttered. Emily had hoped the video footage would soothe her worries that one of her guests might have murdered Joe. Instead, it had only made her speculate that two of her guests had teamed up to do it. She wished the video camera was angled so she could see the guest parking area on one side of the lawn. There was no way to know if Rebecca and Wyatt had driven anywhere, unless Emily flat out asked them about it. With no sound from upstairs to indicate her guests were up and moving, Emily finally decided it was just fine to head to the cemetery. Even if someone came downstairs before she got back, they would find breakfast and hot coffee waiting for them in the dining room. Hilltop Cemetery had a grass parking area between the edge of the hill and the road, and as Emily approached the gates, she saw Reed walking from that direction. "Good morning," Emily called, "and happy Halloween." "I'm not sure there's anything good or happy about it," Reed muttered as he fell into step next to Emily. Emily sighed. "Especially when there was a murder last night." "Yeah, my poor murdered pumpkins." "Oh, you haven't heard? Trish called me with the news, so I figured half the town knows already. Someone was murdered in the town square last night. Judging by Trish's description, Joe Carruthers got the same treatment as your pumpkins." Reed stopped walking and turned to Emily. "And you're missing a carving knife." "And 2 of my guests snuck out last night, and they didn't come back for a couple of hours." Emily took a deep breath. "And 1 of them used to date the murder victim." "Have you called the police yet?" Reed began walking again, but his pace was slower. He threw a glance over his shoulder in the direction of eternal rest. "Detective Hernandez needs to know you might have a couple of suspects under your roof." "I haven't called him yet, no. I'd practically be accusing Rebecca and Wyatt of murder, and they would find out I'm the one who told on them. If it turns out they were just, I don't know, out for a midnight walk or something, then they're not going to appreciate spending half of their Halloween at the police station." Reed made a sound that was part amusement and part incredulity. "You might be serving biscuits to a couple of killers, and you're more worried about your online reviews." "No," Emily said. She felt a slight warmth in her cheeks. "Okay, maybe." Emily felt Reed's fingers gently curl around her forearm. "Call the detective when you get back to the house, for your own safety and peace of mind." Emily promised she would, then turned the subject to Reed's pumpkins. "Sage says you should leave them like that. Instead of a cute little fall display, they've become a Halloween horror diorama." "Not the atmosphere I'm aiming for at the cemetery." Reed narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "Though it would save me a lot of work today. I can throw a plastic skeleton into the scene, maybe add some fake cobwebs. You don't really need your porch decor, do you?" Reed continued to detail his plans as he and Emily walked to the far side of the hill, toward the ruined display. By the time they reached it, Reed was excited about its potential. Nevertheless, he was angry at whomever was responsible for wrecking it. "I am going to catch the kids responsible for this," he vowed. "And when I do, I'm going to make them come out here and do volunteer work to make up for it." Emily nodded her approval. "I like that plan. They can help neaten up some of the old plots and maybe learn to respect historic cemeteries." "In the meantime, I'm going to run to the store," Reed continued. "About $20 worth of decor is all I'm going to need to make this a proper Halloween scene." "Thanks for not just stealing my porch decorations." The 2 of them turned to go, and Emily's eyes landed on a flash of bright red. "Ugh, more blood," she said, more to herself than to Reed. "I suppose I could add some fake blood, too," Reed agreed. "I'm talking about real blood," Emily clarified. "We found some on a couple of the pumpkins last night. At least one of the people responsible for this cut themselves. And look, there's more on the tip of this fence post." Emily walked closer to the corner of the fenced plot, but as she got near, she realized it wasn't blood at all. It was a scrap of red satin that was frayed along one edge. She gave it a flick with her finger. Maybe one of the teens was dressed as a vampire or a superhero, and their red cape snagged on the fence. Reed stepped up next to Emily and carefully pulled the satin off the fence post. "I'll be keeping this for evidence." When Emily started to laugh, he added, "I'm serious. I'll catch these kids, and matching this to a damaged costume might be a way to do it. I'll be downtown tonight for tricks and treats on the town square, and I'm going to keep an eye out for a torn red cape." "I'll be there too, of course, so I'll help you with the search for suspects. In the meantime, I guess I should get back to the house. I have a detective to call." Emily felt relief when she got back to eternal rest and found that she was still the only person downstairs. She heard the floorboards above her creaking and knew some of her guests were awake, but at least she would be able to call Detective Danny Hernandez without worrying she might be overheard. Emily was just preparing to retreat to the kitchen to call Danny when there was a quiet knock on the door. Half expecting it to be Sage, Emily opened it and was about to ask if the murderous vibes she had tapped into were related to Joe's death. Instead, it was Trevor Williams standing there. Emily's one-time assistant had become her friend, but she certainly hadn't expected him to show up on her doorstep so early in the morning. "What's wrong?" she asked, instantly alert. "There's been a murder," Trevor answered. "I know," Emily said, stepping out onto the front porch and shutting the door behind her. She didn't want the conversation to carry upstairs, where her guests might overhear. "Trish called me this morning and filled me in." Trevor barked out a laugh. Of course she did. What she probably didn't tell you is that the victim's ghost is haunting the pumpkin patch. Emily turned her head in the direction of Hilltop Cemetery. "He's haunting my cemetery?" "No," Trevor said, narrowing his green eyes at Emily. "He's haunting the pumpkin patch." "Yeah, I heard you the first time. Someone slashed up all the pumpkins Reed put out in the cemetery, but why is Joe haunting the display?" Trevor nodded. "Haha, I see. We're talking about different pumpkin patches. I mean the one on the town square, where Joe was murdered. That makes a lot more sense." Emily was surprised at how relieved she felt to know the haunting was there rather than in her own cemetery. "And that's why I'm here," Trevor continued. "Sage sent me to get you so the three of us can have a seance with the murder victim." So that is the end of chapter 4. So if you want to hear about the seance and what comes after, keep watching these videos to find out what's next. Thank you.